Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to today's DNS session. We are going to discuss today's newspaper, The Hindu, Delhi edition dated 1st of March 2021. We shall pick up articles important for civil service examination and discuss them as per the demand of the exam. The articles that we are going to take up for discussion have been tabulated in front of you, and the time stamping for the same has been given in the description section. There is an article on page number 1 concerning ISRO's first space mission of 2021. ISRO has launched 19 satellites together. The main payload in the mission was Amazonia 1, and it will be easy to guess that it is satellite of Brazil. Amazonia 1 is actually optical Earth observation satellite that will be used to monitor Amazon forest. Launch of Amazonia 1 is very significant to strengthen India-Brazil relation. This has opened doors of new opportunity to make the relation between India and Brazil more strategic, and new areas of high-end technological cooperation has opened up. This space mission was also significant because this was the first commercial venture of ISRO's new marketing arm, New Space India Limited. New Space India Limited was created after the previous marketing arm, Anthrax, ran into controversy. In our discussion of this article, we shall cover three dimensions. One will be the relation between India and Brazil. The second dimension will be discussion on Earth observation satellite. And we shall also take the opportunity to discuss the third dimension, which is Amazon forest. See, India and Brazil shares very strong bilateral relation. This has been elevated recently. The president of Brazil was the chief guest in 2020 Republic Day parade. India and Brazil already elevated their bilateral relationship to strategic partnership in 2006. And both the countries have been cooperating in many multilateral organizations like BRICS, IPSA, G4, G20, and also cooperate broadly on multilateral issues under United Nations. India and Brazil, along with Germany and Japan, also have aspiration of getting permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. Both the countries have been cooperating on multilateral issues, bringing rule-based governance at international level and democratizing international geopolitical arena. For instance, in 1967, both countries condemned the idea of creating non-proliferation treaty. The two countries also have to play pivotal role in the global South or South-South cooperation. Brazil, in fact, is most important partner of India in the Latin America and Caribbean region. But because of the geographical distance, the trade relation is not very strong. The total bilateral trade between India and Brazil is only of $8 billion, which is meager. But with the launch of Amazon 1, high-end technological cooperation will be strengthened between the two nations, and the bilateral relationship will be strengthened, enhancing the geopolitical significance. The second aspect that we have to cover in the topic is to understand the functioning of Earth observation satellites. See, in 2019 prelims examination, UPSC asked a question which read like this: for the measurement or estimation of which of the following satellite images or remote sensing data used? When remote sensing is done in the form of picture collection, as has been mentioned in this question, or using some optical imaging system like LIDAR, that is called as optical Earth observation. Through optical Earth observation, chlorophyll content in the vegetation of a specific location can be known. Greenhouse gas emission can also be noted because of radiations coming from those gases. And in fact, land surface temperature can also be known through remote sensing or optical remote sensing because the wavelength and frequency of radiation is temperature dependent. Noting down the frequency and the wavelength of radiation, temperature of that region can be figured out. So answer to this question would be option D, but the point to note is chlorophyll content in the vegetation of a specific location can be known by remote sensing application, which means that forest monitoring can be done through this technology, and hence Amazon 1 is going to monitor the Amazon forest. Similarly, in 2015, UPSC asked the application of remote sensing satellites. One of the application was assessment of crop productivity, and that again will be known from the chlorophyll and related data. Remote sensing cannot be used for telecommunication purposes. Communication satellites are actually geostationary satellites. Remote sensing satellites are mostly polar satellites. This question is again reinforcing the idea that vegetation, forest, plant cover, these things can be known and is one of the important application of remote sensing technology. Previously in the DNS, we have elaborately covered the remote sensing technology. I'm appending that video here for your reference. In case you want to brush up with the concept, you can listen to it again. As the name suggests, Earth observation satellites are one that gather information on physical or chemical or biological composition of the system, a part of the Earth, a landscape for which the satellite is designed. Earth observation satellite uses many equipments for remote sensing, and that is why sometimes they are also called as remote sensing satellite. But there is a slight difference. Remote sensing not necessarily creates an image. It can give information about the physical, chemical or biological composition based upon signaling, but not necessarily a mapping or a photograph, two-dimensional or three-dimensional, will be created of the system. But when we say Earth observation, that generally implies that we have a two-dimensional or three-dimensional pictorial representation of the landscape. Regarding Earth observation satellite, the most important thing that we need to understand is sun synchronous orbit. Because most of the Earth observation satellite, not all, most of them, they are placed in the sun synchronous orbits. Some of the Earth observation satellites are also placed in geostationary orbits. To understand sun synchronous orbit, first we need to understand polar orbits. See, a polar orbit is one where satellite passes above or nearly above both the poles in each revolution. Practically, the deviation can be very large. Even when the deviation is up till 30 degree from the poles, still the satellite is classified as polar satellite. The advantage of polar satellite is that it can cover the entire Earth in multiple revolutions. Because when the satellite is revolving around the Earth is also rotating around its axis. So when the satellite in the polar orbit passes through multiple latitudes, the points on Earth on multiple longitudes will be crossing the satellite as well. And when this happens many times, then the mapping of entire Earth will be done. A sun synchronous orbit is a kind of polar orbit in which the satellite remains stationary with respect to the sun. If you join the 3 points, the center of the Earth, the center of the sun and the satellite, then that triangle will not change its inclination. To say it otherwise, the position of the satellite with respect to the sun will not change. And to say it in a more practical manner, the satellite passes over any given point on the planet at the same mean local solar time. This means that suppose at any given point on Earth's surface, the satellite crosses at 3 o'clock in afternoon, then every point on Earth will be mapped at 3 o'clock in afternoon. Because the position of the satellite with respect to sun does not change. This practically is very useful because if you have to compare the maps, the image of different region of the Earth, then you can do it practically at the same hour of the time. If you have to compare map of the same place, but at different point in time, then also it is pretty useful to compare the maps of the place when they are captured at the same local time. There is another advantage of sun synchronous orbit. Initially, the satellites were using visible rays and infrared rays. And those radiations you can set either at the daytime for visible rays or at the time of dawn or dusk for infrared rays. See, this synchronization with the sun happens when the inclination is around 98 degree. You would know that the axis of rotation of the Earth is inclined from the plane of rotation by 23.5 degree. And sun synchronization happens when the plane of the orbit is inclined at around 98 degree. The sun synchronous orbit could be in the range of 600 to 800 kilometer. If you see in this video, you will see that the satellite is not changing position with respect to the sun, and that you can understand from the position of satellite with respect to the illuminated area on the earth. As the area of illumination is changing, so is the position of the satellite. It will be a mental exercise for you to visualize the whole thing. See the position of the earth with respect to sun, and then see the position and revolution of sun synchronous satellite around the earth, and then try and understand what should be the inclination of this satellite so that it remains stationary with respect to the sun. India launched its first earth observation satellite back in 1988, named as IRS-1A. Presently, India has 13 operational satellites in sun synchronous orbit. They are ResourceSat 1, 2, 2A, Cartosat 1, 2, 2A, 2B. We have RESAT 1 and 2, and further the third satellite has been launched. That is Earth Observation Satellite 01. We have OceanSat 2, we have Megatropics, we have Saral, we have SCATSat. But there are certain Earth observation satellite in the geostationary orbit as well. If you want continuous monitoring of an area, then the satellite position with respect to Earth must not change, and that can happen only in geostationary orbits. In the geostationary satellites, mostly we have INSAT series. Earth observation satellite, as the name suggests, can be used to observe anything, right from the land and forest mapping to soil assessment, mapping of other resources like water, any minerals, even fishes. Satellites in the geostationary orbit are very useful for weather and climate observation. If we have to keep an eye on cyclone development in Bay of Bengal or other part of Indian Ocean, then geostationary satellites would be more useful. As we have seen before, Earth Observation Satellite 01 is a kind of RESAT, radar imaging satellite. So we'll talk a little bit about RESAT. RESAT, first of all, is a series of Indian radar imaging reconnaissance satellite. Reconnaissance satellites are also called as intelligence satellites, or informally they are also called as spy satellites. They provide all-weather surveillance, and all-weather surveillance is because of synthetic aperture radars. It is the radar system that provides all-weather surveillance. Radar, which stands for Radio Detection and Ranging System, uses radio waves. Radio waves, you would be aware, is used for long distance communication, and they passes through clouds, rains. These are transparent for the radio wave. This is the advantage of radio wave satellite over optical or infrared based satellites. And you must know that RESAT series is the first all-weather Earth observation satellite from ISRO. And with the launch of Earth Observation Satellite 01, the constellation of 3 satellites is completed. The other 2 being RESAT 2B and RESAT 2B R1. The previous Earth observation satellites of India were primarily optical or spectral sensors, which included electromagnetic radiations mostly in the infrared range, and their working were hampered by cloud cover. Radar imaging satellites are also very effective. The synthetic aperture radar system, which is there in these satellites, they are used to create 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional images very accurately. So completion of the constellation with the launch of EOS-01 is a game changer for Indian space science and also for defense technology, because they can be used as intelligence satellites or spy satellites. Now, coming to the third aspect of this news, we'll have a short discussion on Amazon forest. First of all, Amazon forest is a moist, broadleaf tropical rainforest. This is in the basin of Amazon River in South America. It encompasses 9 nations. Majority of it, almost 60%, is in Brazil. Peru and Colombia have significant percentage of Amazon forest, 13% and 10% respectively. And the forest stretches to other countries like Bolivia, Ecuador, French Guiana, Suriname, and Venezuela. Amazon forest actually houses 60% of world rainforest, and hence the significance of Amazon forest is very high. The forest provides immeasurable amount of ecosystem services. As we have just noticed that this forest actually has broadleaf tropical trees. The transpiration because of the broad leaves is high, In fact, the transpiration contributes to 50 to 75% of precipitation in the region. It is almost like an aerial river moving above the forest. And various climatic models have indicated that Amazon forest influences rainfall even in distant areas in western United States and many countries in Central America. It is a mammoth carbon sink storing 86 billion tons of carbon. It has a stupendous 30% of world species. Ecosystem services like absorption of greenhouse gases, reducing air pollutions, providing support to migratory species, acting as the source of origin for many head streams of many important rivers in the region, helping in the soil formation in the region by its foliage decomposition, and replenishing nutrients in the floodplains in the region that is of enormous importance for agriculture. All these amount to great ecosystem service that the forest is providing. But, however, sadly and unfortunately, 20% of the forest has been destroyed already. For various reasons, one of the important reasons of deforestation in the region is ranching and grassland development. The biggest threat to the survival of Amazon forest is the livestock industry that is wanting the expansion of cattle farming. You must note that the cattle pasture occupy 80% of the deforested area in the Amazon region. Many companies like JBL have been accused of deliberately carrying out deforestation in the region with the support from the government to expand the livestock industry in the region. This is the main manufactured threat to the Amazon forest, apart from other threats like the threat to biodiversity in the region because of monoplantation practice, clearing out the land for agriculture purpose, large hydroelectric projects, mining, logging industry, the timber industry, tourism, biopiracy, threat from alien invasive species. They all are there. But the livestock industry has caused the biggest damage to Amazon rainforest. 20% has been destroyed already. Ecologists are suggesting that if the destruction goes to the extent of 25%, then we will reach to a point where recovery will be impossible. It has been suggested that just like climate treaties, other treaties on biodiversity, etc., there is a need of regional treaty on conservation of Amazon forest. And just like climate treaties, there has to be a financing mechanism for conserving the forest. Principles that have been applied in Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement, etc., like polluters pay principle. These environmental principles have to be applied for conserving the Amazon forest as well. The companies which are responsible for degradation of the forest, they must legally and in the binding manner be made to pay. Any conservation effort cannot be successful without involvement of local community. The immediate and the largest threat, as we have talked about regarding livestock industry, that has to be dealt with. Large livestocks, they should not be reared in that region that require large plots. Crop selection has to be done in a manner that conserves the biodiversity of the region, avoiding monoculture. Since the livestock industry has grown so much in the region, any attempt to reduce the extent of the industry will not be successful without change in the consumption pattern. People must be persuaded for adopting non vegetarian food so that the livestock industry, which is posing threat to the Amazon forest, is checked. The forest that has been destroyed must be reclaimed through international efforts like Bond Challenge. Brazil's economy is not in very good shape, and when the economy is derailed, environment is the first and immediate victim. The leadership of the region, especially of Brazil, needs to understand the importance of Amazon forest, and regional and international treaty must institutionalize the conservation effort. There is an article on page number 9, PM calls for water conservation drive. In the video concerning doubling of farmers' income, Basava sir has discussed the importance and ways and means of water use efficiency. I am appending that particular video for your reference and quick revision.
According to Niti Aayog's Composite Water Management Index report, India is presently facing its worst water crisis in its history. By the end of 2030, the demand for drinking water will outstrip its supply. Almost around 2.4 lakh people across India are dying every year because of lack of access to clean and safe drinking water. So if we have to solve the present water crisis, we would have to enhance the water use efficiency in the Indian agriculture. This is so because agriculture sector accounts for more than 80% of the water consumption in India, out of which the share of the groundwater is quite high at 60%. Apart from that, even today, 52% of the agriculture land is rain-fed, and the yield of this rain-fed agriculture land is almost 3 times lower than the irrigated agricultural land. So the overconsumption of water in the Indian agriculture can be attributed to a number of factors. For example, a higher proportion of cultivated area is under various crops which consume more amount of water, crops such as rice, sugarcane, etc. In fact, the economic survey has highlighted that India, even though it is facing a water crisis, India is a net water exporting country. Now, we call India to be a net water exporting country because if you look at our export basket, the export basket has come to be dominated by the water intensive crops such as rice. China, on the other hand, is considered to be net water importing country. This is so because the export basket of China is dominated by less water intensive crops such as the horticultural crops. The overusage of the groundwater could be attributed to the British era law known as the Easement Act. See, under the Easement Act, if you own a piece of agriculture land, the water beneath that agriculture land becomes your private property. So while the surface water such as ponds, lakes, rivers, etc., they are considered as a public property, the groundwater in case of India, it is considered as a private property. So since the groundwater is treated as a private property, the farmers need not take prior approval or the permission for digging a borewell. There is no regulation as to how much of groundwater can be extracted and so on. So this in turn leads to over exploitation of the groundwater. Apart from that, the free power which is provided in states such as Punjab and Haryana has also led to the over exploitation of the groundwater. So the over exploitation of groundwater has not only led to the depletion of the water table, it has also led to the decrease in the soil fertility. So the question is how to enhance the water use efficiency in the Indian agriculture. See, as far as the rain-fed areas are concerned, in the rain-fed areas, we need to focus more upon the rainwater harvesting. So as part of rainwater harvesting, we need to construct more number of check dams. We could also have a greater convergence between MG Narega and water conservation. So wherein a certain amount of funds for the MG Narega can be used for the desilting of ponds and various water bodies. We can also focus on the conservation agricultural practices such as natural mulching and zero tillage. Conservation agriculture basically means whatever moisture is there in the soil, this moisture should not be lost due to evapotranspiration. This can be done by covering the agricultural land with a crop residue or with a minimal disturbance to the soil, that is a zero tillage. Apart from that, in order to optimally utilize the groundwater, the Ministry of Water Resources has asked the states to adopt a model bill. As part of the model bill, we need to control and regulate the extraction of the groundwater. So the states need to set up a groundwater regulating authority. Such a groundwater regulating authority has to provide for compulsory registration of the borewell owners. Farmers need to take prior permission from this particular authority in order to dig a new borewell. This authority will also lay down restrictions on the depth of the borewell and so on. Further, we also need to rationalize the power subsidies in order to prevent the over exploitation of the groundwater. Apart from that, we also need to promote the micro irrigation techniques such as the drip and sprinkler irrigation. In fact, according to the Committee on Doubling of Farmers' Income, by adopting the micro irrigation, we would be able to enhance the income levels of the farmers by almost up to 50%. As far as the fertigation is concerned, please do let us know in the comment section as to what is fertigation and what are its advantages. This becomes quite important because a rated question has already been asked in prelims 2020.
There's a lead article on page number 6, Spurring a Reawakening with National Science Day. This article is centered around the draft Science, Technology and Innovation Policy, which, by the way, has been covered by our illustrious Vaibhav sir in the DNS dated 28 January 2021. That section of the DNS I'm appending here in case you have missed it or you need a quick refresher.
Let us now begin a discussion on a very important topic from the perspective of both prelims as well as mains examination, and that is the publication of draft Science, Technology and Innovation Policy, which was released on 1st of January. And as we know, government comes up with a policy, and following that release of policy or a scheme, its analysis gets published in newspaper. And so, in this particular article, author Mr. C.P. Rajendran states that the draft science policy is a rambling document. Rambling means very lengthy, but it contains nuggets of scientific vision and information. So, overall, to sum it up, according to him, this policy is in the right direction. But we are not going to keep ourselves limited to what he has said. We are going to first understand the current state of affairs as far as science, technology, and innovation is concerned in India. Because once we understand the current context, we will be able to appreciate the vision of the policy. Once we have appreciated the vision of the policy, then we will look at the important features of this particular draft policy, and then finally we will look into some of the issues which still have not been resolved or addressed in this particular draft policy as well. So what is wrong with India's science, tech and innovation? Now when I say what is wrong with it, there must be something wrong, only then government has come up with a policy, because if something is right, there is no need for the government to intervene in that particular area. And so there are a lot of ways through which India's state of affairs in science and technology can be estimated. And these are number of researchers involved, number of researchers per million population involved in science and tech, spending on R&D, number of publications per year dealing with innovation, and then finally how many people cite the documents being published by Indians. So all these criteria are very important indicators of the state of affairs of science and technology for any country. And so let us see how India performs as far as number of researchers currently active in science and tech. So if you look at the number of researchers in India, it is around 1/5 of that of China, 1/20th of that of USA, and only 3%, that is around 1/30th of that of South Korea. Okay, let's take another parameter, which is number of researchers per million population. So every 10 lakh people in India, we have 216 number of people who are actively involved in research. But if you see, South Korea has 7,100. That is around 35 times more than that of India. Similarly, US has around 4,300 per million population, and China has 1,200 researchers per million population, but that is around 6 times higher than that of India. If we talk about spending on R&D, which is going into science and tech, it is less than 1% of the GDP in India currently. But if you look, South Korea leads the game over here as well, with 4.3% of overall GDP being spent on R&D. Now here an interesting fact is that in 1996 and 1997, both China as well as India spent around the same amount of percentage of GDP on science and tech. And in last 20-25 years, India has reached from 0.6 to 1%, whereas China has tripled the investment. So they started out at the same location, but China has emerged as a clear winner so far. Then if we talk about number of publications per year from a particular country, India publishes around 1/3 of the total number of publications from China. But that is not important. What is important is that how many people refer to your work, include your work in their own researches. Because even if the number of publication is low, but if its citation is high, then that means it is a very high value research. And India performs very poorly as far as citation per document is concerned. And one of the most important reasons behind such a poor performance is plagiarism, which destroys the credibility of the institutions in India. But anyways, we'll not go into that. So these facts were mainly in order to make you understand that there is a need for a clear-cut intervention and push from the government side. Apart from that, these figures written in blue colors are important facts which will help you in mains as well as in essay examination. So please memorize them. So once we have established the current state of affairs, of course, we can now appreciate what the vision of the policy is. As far as the deficit in the number of researchers is concerned, it will aim to double the number of full-time equivalent researchers as well as expenditure in research and development every 5 years. Then it talks about placing or positioning India among the top 3 scientific superpowers within 10 years and to become technologically self-reliant country. Then it aims to attract and retain critical human capital through people-centric STI policy. And then finally, it aims to build individual and institutional excellence in STI with the aim of reaching the highest levels of global recognition as well as awards in next 10 years. So this is a vision, and vision is achieved through features or the provisions in the policy, and let us see that. And so let us now begin the discussion on the features. And one of the important features of this policy, and that is why it has been written at number 1 position, is that it aims to create open science framework and inclusiveness. Now here, open science is a very particular term. Open science or open research means that conduct of a research in such a way so that the research can be disseminated to the very wide audience. So for example, there are 2 ways to do a research. Conduct your research in your lab, keep it totally secret from others, and then publish it or get it patented. But other way to do research is to collaborate other people working in the similar field, involve students in your work, and once that work is published, make it available for free for the wider audience or the public. Now it has a lot of advantages. It gives more exposure to the work of the scientist. People who work in a similar field can apply the findings. Citation rates will be higher if you allow others to use your work. Then finally, it has chances to be included in the policy making. The work of the researchers will reach wider audiences. Taxpayers get value for money, and researchers in developing countries can see most of the works. So this is one. Second is one nation, one subscription policy. So it envisions free access to all journals, Indian and foreign, doesn't matter, for every Indian against a centrally negotiated payment mechanism. So what happens, and most of the people who have done BSc or MSc must have gone through this pain of accessing these journals from Indian universities, and what they find more often than not is that access is denied because their university has not paid for the access to that journal. And so most of the Indians are devoid of this immense knowledge of this premium research going on in USA, Europe, and various places across the world. And so what this policy envisions is that the central government, on behalf of 1.5 billion people, will negotiate a deal with 2 or 3 publishers which publish almost 95% of the work, that any Indian, if she wants to access research paper, that should be available to him or her free of cost, and here is the total lump sum amount. And that is going to be a watershed moment in India's science and tech research, because even a student from class 8th, if he or she has intrigued mind, can go visit the website of the journal and download the PDF for free, which is impossible right now. Then it quite clearly talks about gender parity in science. Now, when we talk about gender, we just don't talk about women. We also talk about LGBTQ community, and that is also reflected in the policy. And to address the issue of inclusion and equity in India's science research and technology innovation, it has made 4 very powerful recommendations. One of them is mandatory positions be allocated for the excluded sections in academics. It talks about 30% reservation for women in decision making, for example, the body which decides the awards in science and various others. Then it talks about shifting from the concept of biological age to that of academic age. So you must have known that whenever we apply for a position, there is usually a cutoff age. But the problem with women is that they have to go through the biological cycle of childbearing, most of them. And what childbearing does is that it interrupts the pursuit of professional career. In most cases, it inflicts a full stop, but in some cases, it is a comma. But nonetheless, there is an interruption in the life cycle of a woman due to childbearing. And so what happens is that when they have to resume their career, they have already crossed that age limit. And so that is why the participation of women, especially in high science and research, is very low. And so that is why it talks about changing the criteria from biological age to that of academic age for women. So number of years you have experience in research, the number of papers you have published should be the determining criteria and not whether you are above 35 or 40 years of age or whatever may be the cutoff date. Then it talks about dual recruitment policy for couples. So basically, what it means is that if there is a couple and if both of them are competent enough, they both should be hired at the same place. Otherwise, what happens is that a female partner, especially in Indian society, has to change places according to the employment position of the male partner. Then it envisages a very, very important entity for collaboration and ensuring ease of doing research, that is, the proposed Science Technology Innovation Observatory, or STIO. Now, according to the policy, the NSTIO will act as a central repository for all kinds of data related to and generated from the science, technology, and innovation ecosystem, and it shall be accessible to many other people, enabling the ease of doing research. Then it also talks about various kinds of funding related to research and development. First and foremost, it wants to expand the funding of science, technology, and innovation ecosystem in our country. It wants to incentivize private participation. It wants to increase the participation of the private sector in research and development. And for that, it talks about various kinds of incentives for leveraging the private sector's R&D participation. To create avenues for collaborative funding through a portfolio-based funding mechanism, it talks about ADMIRE program, or Advanced Missions in Innovative Research Ecosystem, or ADMIRE. And then finally, in science, technology, and innovation, it talks about two agencies, Financial Authority and Development Bank, which, according to the policy, needs to be set up to direct long-term investments in select strategic areas. So these are the features, but there must be some issues. Now, here I would like to point out that since this is a draft policy and so it is liable to change over the course of time, and so the issues which we are going to discuss right now might not remain relevant because the government might decide to incorporate these changes. So the first and foremost issue is how these targets shall be achieved. We have understood that it wants to increase the funding, it wants to incentivize participation of private sector in R&D, it wants to leverage the participation of private sector, it wants to increase the gender participation. All these targets are quite similar to the Science and Technology Policy 2013, which was brought just 7 to 8 years ago, and its performance has been dismal. And so people are commenting what is unique about this particular policy which will lead to its success. And there does not seem to be any innovative idea which has been incorporated in this particular policy. Then the draft policy visualizes decentralized institutional mechanism, which is basically bottoms up approach. But if you read the fine print of this particular policy, it will be clear that ultimately it is a top down approach, because eventually it talks about creation of authorities, executives, giving them powers. So all of them is nothing but a top down approach. And so if you really want to decentralize science research, we need to explore granting of more autonomy to research and academic centers, which has not been stated in this particular policy. So these are just two issues as of now, as in when they emerge, and finally when the draft is converted into the policy, we will take up more issues with this particular one. So with respect to science and technology sector, it is important to keep these facts in mind because they clearly indicate the place of India in global scenario, the vision of draft policy, the features of the draft policy, and the issues of the draft policy.
There is a lead article on page number 6, more about big government than big tech. The issue of government attempting to control the big tech companies and social media platforms have been very elaborately discussed by Mangal Sir just recently on 26 February 2021. This is a very important topic for next mains and interview. Make sure you understand the topic in and out, and if need be, you listen to the discussion again. We have now come to the end of the session. Answer to yesterday's question of the day and today's question of the day is there on your screen. Please attempt the question, write your answer in the comment section, have some fruitful discussion, and also attempt the DNS quiz on the ELEARN platform. Thank you. Goodbye.